Welcome to Life in HD, the personal development and lifestyle blog that shines a spotlight on how we live our lives. I'm Joe Lee. Well, Elizabeth, it's great having you back on our show.
Yeah.
I thought it'd be good to get back together now that we are 4 months into COVID shutdown. To check in to see how folks are doing, how we might be able to manage our stress levels, how we can practice good self-care, probably by listening to birds in Mexico that's going on right now in your background. Uh, what are you hearing from folks that you work with in terms of the kinds of stress they're feeling now?
Yeah, the feeling that folks are coming to me right now with is this feeling of, I hate to use the word uncertainty because it feels like such an overused word right now, but it's like a limbo. People don't really know what to do um, in terms of like, how do they make plans going forward? And, I want to back up for just a second. And, I used to work with a lot of moms who had school age children. And it was always like right around Memorial Day that everyone would just like kind of explode and be like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing because we've been so overscheduled and overworked that now that it's summertime, that they could kind of let things relax. And I think what happened with the sheltering in place is all of that happened just a little bit earlier. And normally what would happen with my clients during the summer is they would kind of go off plan because things were more relaxed, and then they would get back on track once school started again. But we don't know when we're going to get back to that normalcy again. And so I think what's happened is folks have started like these, I don't want to say unhealthy habits, but we could categorize it that way. And they're just continuing with it because they don't really know another way of coping
Mm-hmm.
with what's all going on.
I would
Yeah.
imagine. I would imagine that there was there. So here's my own personal experience.
Yeah.
When this started, at least here in upstate New York, the weather was not amenable to getting outside. So lockdown
Mhm.
really meant lockdown. So not only
Right.
were we locked down, not going into the office, not going into stores, we couldn't even get outside and take a walk unless you like walking in snow and
Cold.
freezing
Mhm.
rain. Um, Once the weather improved and we were able to get out, at least, in my neighborhood, folks were out walking the dog throughout the day, maybe sitting out in the yard. And then we get things beginning to open back up, right? So we're starting to feel a little normal.
Mhm.
We're able to start ordering from restaurants, at least doing takeout. Now some restaurants are open. Still not most folks not going into the office, and then all of a sudden we get this significant rise in cases,
Mhm.
and it looks like things will likely begin to shut down again. And I think it just leaves people in flux. So we begin to feel normal, and now there's a threat of that being taken away from us again. And I can imagine the sort of psychological and emotional roller coaster that folks are on as they're dealing with this. When I look at it here in central New York,
Mhm.
I'm able to get out to a park. I can go to a restaurant, but soon that's gonna tail off because of the weather again, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I look at my own behavior during that time. There was a lot more eating, a lot more snacking throughout the day, especially when you're home and you're bored. Even if I am working, I still have a bag of cashews or something sitting by. There are these constant trips to the cupboard. Um,
Yeah.
Almost every day feels like, even though you're working, almost every day feels like vacation. And when I'm in vacation mode, I'm drinking more.
Yeah.
So instead of my normal a glass of wine or a glass of scotch Thursday, Friday, Saturday, maybe Sunday, it began to be almost every night. Right. So
Right.
these bad habits are starting to creep in, though
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like a problem, but probably can be a long term problem. Is that what you're seeing with some folks when we talk about some of these potential bad habits?
Yes, absolutely. And I would probably be a jerk if I said that I wasn't doing the same thing.
Hmm.
That and for me, it wasn't really the eating, but more letting the couple glasses of wine every night creep in.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, right from the start. So there's a concept called a clean slate event. And what that means is when we want to change habits, or that rather, our habits change when our schedules change. And so we saw that happen when we sheltered in place.
Hmm.
Okay. Now, most of us just let it happen, and we didn't actively think about how did we want that sheltering in place to occur, because we all probably thought that it was going to be just like 2 weeks, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And here we are 4 months later,
Right.
and we're still doing the same thing because we don't know when it's going to end, when we're going to be able to get out of this habit.
Hmm.
And so what needs to happen is that we need to just be a little bit more intentional in terms of how we want what we want our habits to be.
Hmm.
And so, the first thing is being aware of your inputs. And so being aware of what it is that you're thinking about, who is telling you, what's good that's happening, what's bad that's happening. Because what I'm hearing a lot of my clients talk about is that everything is terrible. And so when we keep getting these messages that everything is terrible and we think them ourselves, we buy into that. Our brain actually really likes to be correct, and it likes to be validated. So what happens is we seek out all of the ways that things are terrible,
Right.
and we're not seeing the good things.
Right.
When we see things as terrible and that we are powerless to do anything about it, because that's another aspect to it, is that we're feeling very disempowered with the current situation. There's nothing that we can do about the spread of COVID.
Mhm.
Well, I shouldn't say that. There are things that
Yeah.
we can do individually to stop the spread of COVID, but it feels like it's just so overpowering.
Yeah.
Um, and so, being aware of how we are feeling about all of our different circumstances. Um, it's actually really important to just be aware that when we feel disempowered, then we are reaching for those, scrolling the news,
Mhm.
as well as scrolling social, eating, drinking, maybe online shopping. Online
Yeah.
shopping has gone through the roof.
I was going to mention that. I mean, you're right. I think when we seek to gain recontrol or gain control
Yeah.
of the situation, we want to. It has to be tangible for us. We have to do something. Feel like we are controlling. So, retail therapy, I think,
Hmm.
has been
Hmm.
a real thing. I can't tell you the number of Amazon boxes that came to my home full of crap we certainly don't need.
Yeah.
Some things we do, but my goodness, the doorbell constantly ringing for Amazon packages. The other thing, one of the earlier in these self quarantine mode, one of the few places we could go to was the grocery store. That became
Hmm.
my outing. So in order for me to
Hmm.
take control of the restrictions placed on my movement,
Hmm.
I did a couple of things. One is I would just get in the car and take a drive just to be out and about. The other
Mhm.
thing was finding every little reason I could to go to the grocery store, because at
Mhm.
least that got me out and near and around people.
Yeah.
And then when I do that, again, making up excuses to buy things that I really don't need to eat. So the cupboard
Mm.
was getting stocked with a lot of junk,
Yeah.
a lot of food. And
Mhm.
so, how do we begin to? Because you're right. I think we have to be conscious of the powerlessness that we feel, and then be conscious that we're not doing the wrong things in order for us to feel like we've regained some control. Um, how do we regain control without harming ourselves, like going into debt,
Yeah.
excessive drinking, and eating a lot of the wrong food?
Mhm. Well, so you brought up a really good point, which is, and as far as eating goes, being really mindful of your environment. And so you're not going to eat it if you don't bring it into the house, right?
Mhm.
It's one thing to say, I'm going to go out for a cookie or buy one cookie at the grocery store bakery, but it's another thing to bring home a box of cookies. And so if you do want to clean up your kitchen environment, get rid of all of the stuff that you don't want to eat, that you don't want to be tempted by, and then replace it with stuff that you do want to be.
Mhm.
Okay. So that's something tangible that you can do as far as the kitchen goes. But I think that also one thing that I've started doing, I know that so what we're talking about is numbing.
Mhm.
Okay. So when we feel negative emotion, we distract ourselves with eating, with social, with shopping, or whatever.
Mhm.
And so, one thing to be aware of is, how do I feel when I'm doing that thing? And so, what I've noticed is I've really kind of tuned into my emotions. And when I read through my Facebook feed or Instagram, tuning into what feeling is being evoked. And when I start to feel anxious, I immediately know that I need to control a little bit more or tamper how often I'm going in there.
Mhm.
So setting time limits for each of those apps. So yeah, definitely limit your inputs. Notice also a lot of people love listening to the news or watching the news on TV because they think that, well, first of all, the brain loves getting more information. The brain thinks that everything is going to kill us. And so it watches the news to make sure that we're safe.
Mhm.
And so really being aware that, okay, maybe I'm just going to limit my news to, 1 hour a day. Or if you really need to, 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening.
Mhm.
So again, just being aware of how those different things make you feel.
Mhm.
If you don't feel any better afterwards, you're probably using it to numb.
Right. You can
Okay.
also, I think one of the tactics that I use is to
Hmm.
get away from the network news and cable news on television, and pull up digital news that I can control.
Yeah.
So I may look at articles about money management or
Hmm.
retirement planning. I may look for entertainment news about
Hmm.
some of the programs I'm watching. So you can get that feel of getting information, but you can diversify the information to help manage the stress of all the bad news that's coming your way. Don't you think that's a good strategy?
That is definitely a good strategy because living in Mexico, I actually don't watch network news anymore. I have access to it, but I don't watch it. And so all of my news is actually coming from digital.
Mhm.
And I find that digital news is much less sensational than television news.
Mhm.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
The other thing that has to be happening with folks is just a lot of stress.
Yeah.
There are many people out there that are furloughed, that don't
Hmm.
know if they have jobs to go back to.
Right.
We don't know if unemployment insurance is going, and those benefits are going to be extended. So folks are worried about that. They're worried about paying rents and mortgages. I mean, there's a lot of worry out there. What kinds of things are you telling your clients to do to help manage some of this tremendous stress?
Yeah. And I don't, yeah, that's a really good point. And I don't want to minimize any of that stress. And I don't want to paint the picture that life could be rainbows and unicorns if, you are facing furlough or job loss, because those are very real concerns. What I like to do with my clients is reframe all of it. And instead of allowing our brains to run off into the future and catastrophizing, really just looking at the facts. What are the facts? What are the risks that worry is going to happen? And really just being aware of what is my brain coming up with in terms of, yeah, the catastrophe. Like, am I going to be living in a van down by the river, homeless?
Hmm.
You know, what's the reality of that? And then taking steps to protect yourself. But the other piece to that is when I talked about earlier about looking around and having everything be negative, what I've found works for myself and works for my clients is that not everything is negative.
Hmm.
There are some positive things happening in the world.
Right.
Because I hear blanket statements of everybody's losing money. Well, not everyone is losing money. Amazon, for example, is not losing money.
Right.
Alcohol manufacturers are not losing money. And there are some businesses that are actually thriving right now.
Right.
So what are the things that you can be grateful for in your life? And, I think that gratitude is actually a skill that we need to build. It's not we think that it should come naturally to us, but I think that it's actually a skill that we really need to build, because I had a really hard time incorporating that into my life.
Hmm.
So the more that you can actively point out the good things that are happening in your life, the more your brain will, going back to the cognitive bias, the more your brain will seek out positive inputs as well.
Yeah. Another thing that concerns me in terms of the our mental health is
Hmm.
the social isolation. I never
Yeah.
thought that I could actually live with two people and still feel isolated. You know,
Mm.
it's I guess I'm more of a communal being than I gave myself credit for,
Mhm.
and so not being able to just be around people in a restaurant. Some restaurants are open, but we're still not 100% feeling comfortable going out. We've been out a
Right.
couple of times. Um, so just sort of managing that. Now I can get out to a park now. We have a sizable park that's close to me. There are a lot of people out there this time of year. But I do get concerned about when those parks close and outdoor is no longer a reality, and we are going back into some stage of self quarantine, that continued isolation, and what that does to a person's psyche, when you feel like you're no longer a part of a community. I think when
Mhm.
we go to restaurants and bars, when we go to a museum, when you go to the theater, you may not be interacting with people, but you feel like you're a part of a community. Right now, it
Mhm.
feels like I'm surviving the apocalypse with a couple of people in my house. So
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm missing that community feeling. How do we begin to address that? How do we tackle that?
Yeah, I think it actually needs to be much more intentional than what we have done before. We've allowed our interactions to be much more passive before. Like if I saw my friend at work, then we would chat, or, it would just be situational, environmental. And so if you want to connect more with people, you need to actively seek them out and connect with them. And
I'm seeing a lot of people organizing Zooms around
mhm,
certain things. It could be an evening happy hour. We had a couple of gatherings with friends for birthdays, and I think that gives a pretty positive and feel good moment when you can connect like that, but they do get old pretty quickly. I don't know if that
Mhm.
is the case for you. But once you start getting into the technical difficulties and the freezing frames and the screaming kids or whatever, it's just it begins to get a little old for me.
Mhm. Mhm.
So finding other ways to connect with people, I think it's important to maintain that community feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And also connecting maybe in a different way with the people who are living in your house too.
Yes. Hmm.
Like being intentional about that, instead of, again, just allowing things to happen, making them happen
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I noticed that I feel better when I'm attending some virtual events. So there have been a number of, and I think this isn't. You're right that there are a lot of businesses that are thriving, and there are some businesses that are able to maintain some connection with their customers through
Hmm.
digital events. And so I've attended a number of wine tastings with some of my favorite wineries. Um, I've There are like wine.com where I buy a good portion of my wine. It actually
Hmm.
has these tastings that you can order the wine in advance. So you'll sign up for
Mm.
the tasting, order the wine or liquor in advance. You get it, and then you're doing the tasting, and you're able to taste the exact wine that the experts are talking about, or the exact liquor that they are on there talking about. And I did one with a couple of celebrity folks that was pretty cool. So I'm finding that those kind of events bring me uh, some joy when you're not able to get out to the theater, because I love live theater, I love movies.
Hmm.
That's helping, and I think folks can probably, if they have those offerings out there and take advantage of it, there could be cooking. I noticed that our public television station here in Central New York is doing some celebrity sort of chef shows. And so you can order the ingredients in advance and cook
Hmm.
along with them. I think those kinds of things that are coming along are really cool.
Yeah, I've seen those. I mean, obviously, there's been a ton of online exercise stuff. I love the idea of the online wine tasting. That's amazing. Why
Yeah.
didn't I hear about that?
Yeah. So let's talk briefly about my fat body. Um,
Oh, no.
I started out uh, during this thing doing really well.
Yeah.
I have some equipment at home, and I
Hmm.
thought once the weather cleared up that I would certainly get out and move more. And I have. I'm walking around the lake at least 2-3 times a week. But
Hmm.
man, when I'm sitting in my recliner and thinking after the day's work is done, and thinking about um, going down in my basement to work out versus
Hmm.
sitting in a recliner. The recliner
Yeah,
wins every single time. So,
absolutely it
so I'm
does.
trying to, I am trying to figure out how to shake that. Now, if folks who are listening listen to the last episode of my of the podcast, you heard my previous guest say, and I'm going to take this to heart. He said you have to develop a no bullshit attitude between where it is you are and what it is you want to do, right? So all that
Hmm.
space in between, the excuse why I'm sitting in a recliner or watching the television, the excuses why I'm not going down into the basement to work
Hmm.
out, I have to develop a no bullshit attitude in that space. And
Okay.
so it's a different motivation when you put it in those terms and in that language. It made
Hmm.
my ears perk up, and I said, yeah, I guess I am BSing myself. you know
Hmm.
um it's tough to do, though. It's tough
Yeah.
to, and so I've lost some muscle mass.
Hmm.
I don't think my clothes aren't fitting any different, but
Okay.
that's just a matter of time, right?
Yeah.
So
Okay, so here I have two things for you. One is the reason why you're sitting on the recliner instead of working out has to do with something called the motivational triad. And it's why we do anything as humans. It's you are totally normal. And the motivational triad is three things. We as humans seek pleasure, we avoid pain, and we want to do it as efficiently as possible.
Mhm.
And so, of course, you are like, sitting in this recliner is enjoyable,
Mhm.
watching Netflix. Going to work out is going to be painful. I don't want to do that.
Mhm.
And efficiently as possible, well, I'm already doing this.
Right.
So what could be easier than that?
Right. I,
So you are totally normal in your actions.
right. So
Mhm.
I tried to adopt the no BS attitude. Went
Okay.
down last night, did some squats, did some chest
Hmm.
work, and some tricep work, and I felt better. I mean,
Yeah.
it was probably a maximum of 15 to 20 minutes. I said, let me just get started
Yeah.
again, because what I'm missing is the routine. You know,
Hmm.
when I had my routine of
Hmm.
physically going to the office,
Yeah.
when I got home, I immediately changed my out of my work clothes into my workout clothes and then went to the gym.
Yeah.
And then I'd
And
come
you
home,
didn't sit down on the recliner.
did not sit down. So that routine worked for me. And now
Yeah.
I've not developed a new routine. So when
Hmm.
the workday is done, there's no commute. I can immediately run to the refrigerator and grab a glass of white wine, or
Hmm.
grab some snacks, get caught up on the news, and all of a sudden I'm stuck. Now I can't.
Yeah.
Now that going to the into my exercise room is no longer a reality for me. So
Hmm.
I guess I have to develop some different rhythms.
Yeah.
The same kind of rhythm I had before.
Right. So here's what I like to do with my clients. To I talk about something called the future version of yourself. So we have three different versions of ourselves in air quotes. So there's the past version of myself, there's the present version, and then there's the future version. If you want to do something um, in the future, the best thing to do is set your future self up for success.
Hmm.
Okay. Don't sabotage the future version of yourself. Okay. And we have this idea as humans that the future version of ourselves is going to be perfect.
Hmm.
So, like, the future version of myself next week is going to cook all organic, vegetables and farm raised meats and garden and do all of these amazing things. We have this perfectionistic fantasy of how our life is going to be in the future.
Hmm.
And then when our current self, who is full of flaws, and I say that very compassionately, shows up in the future, we're like stunned as to why we aren't doing the thing that we thought we were going to do.
Hmm.
And so when we set out goals for ourselves, I think it's super important to be aware that the future version of ourselves is actually more like we are today
Hmm.
than we think we're going to be in the future.
Okay.
Okay. So, one really good question to ask yourself is, if I wanted to work out right now, what could I have done? What could the past version of myself done to make me want to do that right now?
Hmm.
And so one of the things is, don't pass go. Do not collect $200. Do not grab yourself a glass of white wine. Do not sit down on the recliner.
Hmm.
When you're done with work, immediately go to the gym or your basement and work out, or do it first thing in the morning before you go to work.
Right.
Somehow set up your calendar, your schedule, so that it sets you up for success.
Right.
Okay. Now, that being said, if you schedule it on your calendar, I will guarantee you that you are not going to want to go exercise. You need to make yourself do it anyway. And
Mm.
that's just the process of creating discipline in your life
Right.
and self-trust as well. because a lot of times we will create goals for ourselves and not follow through. And what that does is it breaks self-trust, so that we want to do it in the future, but we're like, yeah, but I'm really not going to.
Yeah.
So if you can build up self-trust, then you can also build up discipline.
Okay. I think what I'm going to do is on days where I don't have video meetings, I'm just going to work in my gym clothes.
That's possible too.
that
Yeah.
that way, when I am done with my last assignment, I can just go straight and work out. So
Hmm.
give me a couple of things, and as we look at self-care holistically, through
Yeah.
everything that we're talking about, um, give us like two or three things that we should be doing, that we can start doing to take care of ourselves mentally, physically, and emotionally.
Yeah. Good question. So I think that first, really have compassion for yourself and realize that the reason that we've gained weight during COVID, or that you're drinking too much or eating too much, is a coping mechanism, and that it's okay. It doesn't make you a terrible person. It just is what it is.
Hmm.
Okay? So really try to have compassion with yourself and speak to yourself as you would your child or your best friend. Okay?
Okay.
Um because we think that if we say terrible things to ourselves, like, oh, you're such a jerk for not exercising, you said you were going to do it and you're not, that's going to make us compliant, but it really won't.
Right.
Okay, so that's the first thing. Really have compassion for yourself. The second thing is being aware of arguing with reality. So when we hear things, when we hear ourselves think things like things should be different, that's just creating pain. Okay. And that's going to cause us to want to overeat, to drink, to escape, to Netflix, to shop.
Hmm.
Okay. So that's the second thing. Just be aware of arguing with reality, because I'm seeing that a lot with my clients and my friends, is that they're saying, well, I should have been on vacation right now.
Right.
And I get that, but it's not helpful to
Right.
think those thoughts.
Okay.
So acknowledge where you are, and then create a vision of who you want to be in the future. So who do you want to be in 6 months or when COVID is over? And again, don't try to be, don't try to do the perfectionistic fantasy of, that everything is rainbows and unicorns.
Hmm.
So really think about who you are today, what's realistic in the future, how do you want to how much do you want to be drinking and when? How
Hmm.
much do you want to be eating and when? What does that food look like? How do you want to feel in your clothes? How do you want to wake up in the morning? Like, get really detailed as much as you can in terms of what that future version of yourself is like. And then slowly start to adopt those beliefs and values. You do not have to change overnight. Just like, New Year's.
Hmm.
It's not helpful to be like, okay, tomorrow I'm turning over a new leaf.
Right.
Every day, just do one thing that is going to move you in the right direction. Move that dial just 1% over to the better side.
Hmm.
And eventually you will get there. But again, have compassion for yourself when you fail or don't follow through.
Right.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. Give folks an idea of where they can get more information from you and learn about some of the work you're doing.
Yeah. So you can find me on elizabethsherman.com, or you can find me on Facebook or Instagram. And you can find those links on my website. So
Okay.
elizabethsherman.com. Yeah.
And you failed to mention my personal visit to Mexico to meet you in person. Where's my
Yes.
invite? I'm looking.
You can come down and visit me in Mexico. That's absolutely correct.
Well, thank you very much. I look forward to talking to you again. Let's check in again as this thing progresses. My feeling is, things are going to get worse before they get better. Um,
Yeah.
we're seeing spikes in certain states. Certain states are sort of holding the line. Um, but it impacts us all and affects us all because, we're just constantly worried about getting back to what was normal for us. So I'd like to check in again to see where we are and how we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can just plug one more thing is
Sure.
that if you can take care of your body, you're probably going to have a much better chance of not just surviving, but coping with getting COVID.
Right. That's great advice. Well, thank you very much, and thanks again.
Yeah, absolutely.